Imagine waking up to the sound of a gunshot. Not in a movie, but in real life. You fling open the flaps of your canvas tent, squinting into a dust-choked sunrise, only to see two men arguing over a stolen horse. One's got a shotgun, the other's got a shovel. And you've got exactly two options. Stay quiet or start digging. Either a grave or a getaway tunnel. Welcome to the Wild West, where everything wanted to kill you, from the weather to the whiskey. It wasn't all saloons and six-shooters. No, sir. If you didn't know how to survive out here, the desert, the diseases, or that neighbor with trust issues and a twitchy finger would handle the rest. This video, it's your survival manual. A whispered, slightly ridiculous, oddly relaxing guide on how to not die in the Wild West. So pull up a bedroll, grab your canteen, and maybe hit that like button before your internet gets shot out by a tumbleweed with attitude. And comment below. Would you make it a week in the Old West? Or would you be the one yelling, "It's just a scratch," with an arrow in your shoulder? Because tonight, we ride. Or at least, we recline and learn how not to get eaten by coyotes. Either way, welcome to How to Survive the Wild West and more. You wake up to the smell of gunpowder and wet leather. Not the kind of morning you'd get in a modern-day Airbnb. No breakfast buffet. No complimentary Wi-Fi. Just the creak of the windmill outside, the stiff crunch of your worn-out bedroll, and the slow realization that you're not in Kansas anymore. Or if you are, it's Kansas without plumbing, AC, or mercy. The year is 1873. The floor is dirt. The ceiling is stars. And your closest neighbor might be 5 miles away, or right next to you with a Colt revolver and opinions about your horse. You blink against the early light, your body sore from a night spent curled like a comma. A tumbleweed scuttles past like it has business to attend to. Your boots are where you left them last night, but one has a scorpion inside, just chilling like it pays rent. You flick it out with your knife, your one and only piece of security, and lace up with a kind of determination that only people in life-or-death conditions can afford. You're in the Wild West now. Breakfast, or lack thereof. First mission of the day. Not dying of starvation. You check your pack. 2 hard biscuits, 1 strip of jerky tougher than your last relationship, and a tin cup that smells like regret and bean water. There's a creek nearby, but it's filled with frogs and looks suspiciously like something a bison might have sneezed in. Do you drink it? Well, here's your first lesson. Boil everything. If it doesn't hiss or make tea, don't drink it. People back then didn't know the word bacteria, but they knew what it felt like. Trust me, you do not want to spend your afternoon running into the prairie grass every 10 minutes like you're in a very embarrassing foot race with your own digestive system. You boil water over a small fire, trying not to attract attention. Smoke means you're cooking, or wounded, or both. Either way, it's an invitation to bandits, coyotes, or just really lonely people who want to talk about their gold mine. Again, clothing, survival by wardrobe. What are you wearing? No, seriously, it matters. The wrong outfit and you're a heat stroke away from becoming prairie jerky yourself. You need layers. Wool, even in summer. Light cotton underneath to soak up the sweat. And a hat. A wide-brimmed, seen better days hat. It keeps the sun out of your eyes and tells people, yes, I know how to ride a horse, even if you absolutely do not. Your boots are cracked. Your belt is stitched with old thread, and your coat, probably stolen off a drunk man 3 towns over. But it fits, and it smells better than you do, so that's a win. You pack up camp. Every movement is slow, efficient. You've learned not to rush. Rushing gets you injured. Or worse, noticed. Noise is your enemy. Listen. Really listen. The prairie has its own language. There's the rustle of dry grass in the wind, the occasional chirp of a distant hawk, and then, too soft for a greenhorn to catch, the shuffle of something else. Hoofbeats. Not yours. Not your horse's. And not the welcome kind. You crouch. Hold your breath. Hand on your knife. It passes. A lone rider, maybe. Or a scout for something worse. You keep your eyes low, stay still, and don't move until the noise is gone. In the West, survival is half instincts, half timing, and half luck. Yes, that's 3 halves. Welcome to frontier math. Nothing adds up out here. Your horse is your lifeline. You approach your horse with caution, not because you're afraid of her, but because she's smarter than you are. Her name's Millie. She's got more sense than half the saloon owners you've met, and a temper that's already gotten 3 boots kicked across 3 states. But she likes you, probably because you don't talk much and share your biscuits. You brush her down quickly. Check her hooves. Whisper something soft to her. Horses know fear, and they don't tolerate fools. If she senses danger before you do, and she often will, trust her. You climb into the saddle and look out across the vast emptiness. The road ahead is open, golden with the light of a rising sun that already smells like heatstroke. There are no signs, no gas stations, just cactus, sky, and consequences. Time to ride. The saddle creaks as you ride, a sound so familiar you've tuned it out, just like you've tuned out the ache in your legs, the sun peeling your neck like an old label, and the fact that you haven't had a proper meal in 2 days. Because now it's time to talk about food. Ah, yes. Food. The second most important thing out here, right after not being murdered. But in the Wild West, those 2 often felt connected, because when you were starving, even a questionable stew looked like salvation. The only problem, half the time, that stew could kill you faster than a bullet. Let's start with foraging. Welcome to the buffet of death. You spot some berries growing wild under a scraggly juniper bush. They're purple, round, plump, tempting. But are they edible? Or are they nature's cruel prank? Out here, there's no USDA, no ingredient list, no overly cheerful TikTok chef warning you against accidental neurotoxins. Just your gut, and that's the worst judge of all. Rule 1. If you don't know what it is, don't eat it. The West is full of innocent-looking snacks that could have you hallucinating under a cactus within the hour. White nightshade berries. Death in a cute little package. Some mushrooms. A coin toss between nutrition and nausea. Even cactus water, praised in modern smoothies, could dehydrate you faster than it hydrates. In other words, if you're going to forage, find someone who looks like they talk to plants. Follow them. Don't ask questions. Just copy what they chew. Beans. The frontier's favorite gamble. Let's talk about beans. The cornerstone of Western cuisine. also known as dinner, breakfast, and occasionally, please forgive me for what I'm about to do in this tent. Cowboys cooked beans over open flames in battered tin pots, usually after a long day of herding cattle or narrowly avoiding arrows. And they didn't just eat beans. They lived on beans. Pinto, navy, black, whatever they could grow, trade, or steal. Paired with salt pork or dried beef, it was filling, if repetitive. Add a little chili, and you were practically gourmet. Of course, there were consequences. Musical, gaseous consequences. But when survival's on the menu, you don't complain about side effects. Unless those side effects attract bears. Then maybe. You whisper your regrets to the stars. Salted meat. The jerky of destiny. Your saddlebag contains one holy relic. A thick, leathery strip of beef jerky. It's as hard as horse tack and smells slightly like old shoes. But in this land, that's good. It means it's preserved. It means it won't kill you. Probably. Salted meat was the fridge before fridges. Packed with sodium and fear, it could last weeks, sometimes months, if kept dry and out of the sun. You'd chew it slowly, each bite a tug of war with your jaw. But it gave you strength. Protein. Something to hold on to when the wind howled and the campfire dimmed. Just don't break a tooth on it. There are no dentists here. Only whiskey. And very bad ideas involving pliers. The mysterious case of wild game. If you wanted fresh meat, you had two options. Hunt it or be hunted by it. Rabbits, deer, turkey, wild hogs. These were the prizes. But they didn't just walk into your skillet. You had to stalk, aim, pray, and hope your bullet flew straighter than your hands were shaking. You remembered the first time you skinned something yourself. The heat, the smell, the way the fur stuck to your clothes, your fingers, your thoughts. It was humbling, messy, intimate, and necessary, because if you couldn't kill what was killable, something else would kill you. Bread of the brave. Sometimes you were lucky enough to have flour. Maybe you traded for it, or looted it, or just carried it in your saddlebags like a clumsy ghost. From flour came biscuits. Thick, hard, and slightly burnt if you weren't careful. Mixed with a little water, slapped on a hot stone, and baked until they stopped being wet. These frontier biscuits were tough love in edible form. They didn't rise. They didn't crumble. But they filled your gut and didn't argue. And that was more than you could say for most people. Throw in a dab of lard, maybe some honey if you were absurdly rich, and suddenly you were royalty. Grimy, sunburned royalty with biscuit crumbs in your beard. Coffee, the liquid savior. And then coffee. Black, bitter, burnt, bliss. Boiled over an open flame. Poured through a sock, if you were fancy. Drunk hot or cold or lukewarm or whatever the fire allowed. Coffee kept the world spinning, or at least kept you awake long enough to saddle your horse and check the horizon again. Even folks who hated coffee drank it in the West. Why? Because water was risky, tea was expensive, and whiskey wasn't exactly an everyday beverage unless you had a death wish and a short attention span. Coffee was life. A gritty, cracked mug kind of life, but life nonetheless. The stranger's stew. Every so often, you came across someone else's fire. A prospector, a trapper, a group of slow-moving settlers who didn't know better than to let their stew boil unattended. If you were brave and starving, you'd accept a bowl, even if it smelled like desperation, even if it had ingredients you couldn't name, especially if it did, because sometimes the greatest meal of all wasn't about flavor, it was about company, someone to share beans with, someone to laugh with after choking on burnt biscuit, someone to say, "This ain't bad," when what they really meant was, "We're alive. It's been a week. Maybe longer." You've lost track of time somewhere between the endless dust, the cattle stench, and the way your socks now stand up on their own. There's a distinct scent trailing you, somewhere between smoked beef and swamp regret, and it's time to face the dirty truth. You need a bath. In the Wild West, that wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an adventure, because bathing out here, rare, risky, and often optional. The standoff with soap. Soap was a luxury. A bar of it cost more than lunch in most towns. You had your choices: lye soap strong enough to strip paint, or pine tar soap that left you smelling like an angry tree. And that's if you had soap. Most folks just relied on what nature gave them: sand, ashes, or sheer force of will. The logic went something like, if the wind blows hard enough, maybe I'll exfoliate by accident. Clean was relative, smelling slightly less offensive than your horse counted as high hygiene. Bathhouses, bliss or bankruptcy. If you were in a town and had a few coins left that weren't spoken for by gambling debts or gun oil, you might wander into a bathhouse. Picture it: a wooden shack with steaming tubs, mismatched towels, and a stern lady at the door reminding you no funny business. For a few silver coins, you got hot water, a quick scrub, and the sweet illusion that civilization wasn't a total myth. It was heaven. Fleeting, wet heaven. But it came with its own risks, like sharing tub water with a local blacksmith, or sitting where someone just picked buckshot out of their thigh. Clean. Sure. Clean enough. Always. Rivers. Nature's bathtub, with fish and danger. Out in the open, a river was your best shot. You found a spot downstream, because no one wanted to bathe where the horses drank. You undressed slowly, scanning the horizon for movement. Coyotes. Strangers. The occasional preacher judging you from behind a bush. The water was always cold. It shocked your skin, woke your bones, and made you question every life choice that brought you to this very moment, naked in a stream with one eye open. But when you dunked your head and came up gasping, it felt right. Clean wasn't a status. It was a feeling, and for a few minutes, you felt human again. Laundry. The real frontier tragedy. Now, your clothes. Imagine trying to wash jeans that hadn't been off your body in 14 days. They stood on their own. They held stories, regrets, possibly lice. Doing laundry meant soaking them in creek water, scrubbing with sand or ash, then hanging them on a bush while you prayed the wind didn't carry off your dignity. Underwear, a rare breed, rotated and reused until the thread begged for retirement. Most of the time, your clothes stayed dirty. Layers of sweat and dust formed a kind of armor, and if you didn't smell too bad, people thought you were fancy or suspicious. The smell of the West. Let's be honest, nothing smelled good. People stank. Horses stank. Food stank. The entire frontier was a cocktail of musk, meat, manure, and mystery. Perfume existed, but it was reserved for the wealthy, or the well-prepared ladies of the saloon. A drop of lavender oil behind the ear, that could get you marriage proposals, or at least fewer complaints on the stagecoach. But most just embraced the funk. If you couldn't beat it, you became part of it. Grooming, a knife, a mirror, and a prayer. Shaving, only if you had time, a calm hand, and skin made of leather. Men carried razors, or knives, or they didn't shave at all. Beards were badges of honor, nests of dust, crumbs, and the occasional spider. A good mustache could get you out of a fight. A bad one might start one. Haircuts were interpretive. You'd sit on a log while your buddy took clippers, or dull scissors, and went to war with your scalp. Lopsided was normal. Bald spots were earned, and if someone called you handsome after, you knew they were either drunk or lying. But hey, you felt lighter, less itchy, like maybe you had a fresh start, until the wind kicked up again. The myth of the clean cowboy. Movies lied. Cowboys didn't wear perfectly pressed shirts. They didn't glisten under the sun like cologne models. They were grimy, greasy, often bleeding from places they didn't talk about. A real cowboy's shirt was stiff with sweat and dust. His boots cracked. His hat was stained from rain and regret. And if he did smell good, you knew he'd just robbed someone cleaner. That's the truth of it. When clean meant vulnerable. Bathing meant letting your guard down. You took off your gun belt. You closed your eyes. You were exposed. So many waited. Waited until the stink couldn't be ignored. Until the grime clung to them like guilt. Because washing meant weakness. And weakness got you killed. It was a decision every day. Cleanliness or caution. Most chose caution, because you could survive being dirty. But you couldn't survive being distracted. Out here, on this raw and restless land, trust is a luxury, a gamble, a loaded die tossed in the dark. In the Wild West, everyone you meet carries a story, and probably a weapon. Maybe they're just passing through, hunting coyotes or dreams. Maybe they're on the run from the law. Or maybe, just maybe, they're looking for someone to shoot before breakfast. So how do you tell the difference between a friend and a foe? You don't. You learn to walk the tightrope of silence, glances, and gut feelings. And sometimes, even that's not enough. The first greeting. Nods, not words. The most common greeting on the frontier wasn't a handshake or a howdy. It was a nod. Quick, measured, eyes watching everything but your hands. You nod back. If they nod slower, it's usually safe. If they nod too fast, trouble. That fast nod means nervousness. Or they're buying time. Or they're trying to remember if they recognize your face from a wanted poster. Words came later, if at all. People talked only when they had to, especially strangers. Because the moment your voice cracked, or your hand twitched, or your eyes darted too quick to the side, well, that could be your last sentence. The saloon test. The saloon was more than a bar. It was a battleground in disguise. You walked in through swinging doors, eyes adjusting to the smoky haze. the sour smell of spilled whiskey, and the tinny piano that never quite got tuned. And then the heads would turn. Not all, but enough. Just enough to freeze your spine. You picked your seat carefully, never with your back to the door, never at someone else's usual table, never near the guy polishing a knife with one eye closed. You ordered something easy. Coffee, maybe beer, never the house whiskey. That was mostly kerosene and hope. If someone nodded, nod back. If someone smiled, smile carefully. If someone walked over with a question, your answer was short, calm, friendly, but not too friendly. Because in the West, friendliness was often the first move before betrayal. You could meet your best friend in a saloon, or the man who'd shoot you over a spilled drink. Either way, it all started with that first drink. Firelight friendships. The best friendships were born in the dark, out on the trail, around a fire. When you shared your last biscuit with a man who looked like he hadn't smiled in weeks. He'd pass you the canteen, maybe roll a cigarette. You'd trade stories, not the whole truth, but close enough. A name, a place, a reason to keep riding. You learned to listen to tone, not just words, because folks in the Wild West carried wounds in their voices, and those who talked too smooth usually hid knives in their boots. But sometimes, under starlight, you'd find someone honest, raw, just trying to survive, like you. You wouldn't call it friendship, not yet, but it was something, and in the West, something meant a lot. Betrayal was just a Tuesday. 1 minute you're riding side by side with a man who taught you how to skin a rabbit. The next, he's gone, along with your saddlebag, your silver, and your last clean shirt. Trust broke easy out here. Sometimes it was over a poker hand, or a whispered rumor, or just plain fear. Men turned on each other faster than horses at a gunshot, because survival wasn't always about grit. Sometimes it was about doing the wrong thing fast enough to live. So you learned to watch every move, every shift, every sentence that didn't quite fit, not because you were paranoid, but because you'd seen what happened to those who weren't. They ended up face down in the dirt, wondering how they didn't see it coming. Women knew the game best. Women in the Wild West were the sharpest minds you'd meet, and the hardest to read. They ran boarding houses, ran brothels, ran from towns that forgot their names. They had eyes that missed nothing and smiles that could cut glass. If you earned their trust, you were safer than any bank vault. But break it. You'd better hope you had a fast horse and a slow bullet. Women didn't need guns to be dangerous. They had memory. And in the West, a good memory was deadlier than a rifle. The code of the trail. There was a code, unwritten, but followed by those who wanted to keep breathing. You don't steal another man's horse. You don't shoot someone in the back, unless they deserve it. You don't lie about water, ever. And if someone saves your life, you owe them, not with words, but with your own life, if need be. That was the code. Not everyone followed it, but the ones who did. They were the ones worth riding with. Learning to read a man. It didn't take long before you could tell everything you needed to know about someone by the way they rode. tied their bedroll, or cleaned their gun. A man who rushed. He'd get you killed. A man too quiet. Maybe haunted. Maybe dangerous. Maybe both. A man who laughed too much. Usually scared inside. The best kind. Steady hands. Sharp eyes. A story they never quite finished. Those were the ones you trusted. Not because they promised, but because they didn't have to. They'd earned it, one slow nod at a time. Evening crept over the plains like spilled ink, turning the dust trails into ribbons of gold and shadow. The Wild West, for all its clamor and grit, had a strange kind of stillness at sundown, and if you ever wanted to survive another day out here, dinner time wasn't just about food. It was about safety, stories, and the thin line between a warm belly and a cold grave. Let's talk about dinner in the Wild West. Now, if you're picturing a roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and sparkling cider, you're in the wrong century, my friend. Meals were often scavenged, slapped together over open fires, and eaten while looking over your shoulder. You might have jerky, tough as saddle leather, or beans boiled until they begged for mercy. Cornbread was a luxury. Coffee. It was thick enough to patch wagon wheels. And yet, nothing brought people together quite like those meals. Cowboys, trappers, and settlers all huddled around their little cook fires, swapping tales of rattlesnakes, railroads, and regrettable romances. The flames danced on their faces, while tin cups clinked like church bells in the silence of the desert. It was here, by the firelight, that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about community. Even the toughest gunfighter needed someone to watch his back, someone to laugh at his bad jokes, someone to notice the shadow slipping through the sagebrush. Now, let's say you were a newcomer, fresh off a wagon from back east. You probably hadn't slept in days. Dust clung to your scalp. Your horse smelled like regret. And when you sat down for your first meal by the fire with strangers, every sound felt amplified. The howl of a distant coyote, the creak of your saddle, the rustle in the grass behind you. You weren't just hungry. You were on edge. That's why many folks in the Wild West took great care with where they camped. They didn't just choose a spot with a nice view. No. They picked places where they had cover. Boulders, trees, maybe a bend in a dry riverbed. They never camped on the top of a hill. Too exposed. Too easy to spot. Too easy to shoot. Speaking of which, misfires. Firearms in the Wild West were as common as mosquitoes, and just as irritating when used poorly. If you thought every cowboy was some sharpshooting Clint Eastwood, think again. Most folks were average shots at best, and guns were, well, unreliable. Powder would get wet. Barrels rusted. Springs failed. Misfires could cost you your life. Or, more embarrassingly, your dinner. Imagine this. You're out hunting rabbit. You line up your shot. You whisper a prayer to whoever's listening. You pull the trigger. Click. Nothing. Just the rabbit blinking at you like it's judging your entire lineage. It hops away, leaving you and your empty stomach to sulk back to camp. Now imagine that wasn't a rabbit. Imagine it was a bandit. Or worse, a mountain lion. That's why maintaining your gun wasn't just a hobby. It was survival. Folks cleaned their rifles every night. They checked their rounds. Some even slept with their pistol tucked under their blanket roll, right next to their Bible, just in case. But the Wild West wasn't all danger and dust. There were quieter moments too, moments of strange beauty. Have you ever stood outside under a sky so wide it felt like it might swallow you whole? The stars in the desert were uncountable, sharp, bright, eternal. Coyotes howled lullabies. The prairie wind whispered lullabies through the grass. You could lie there, wrapped in your blanket, and feel the pulse of the land, the way it breathed, the way it watched. And just when your eyelids began to droop, you'd hear it, that midnight whisper, a horse shifting in the dark, a twig snapping underfoot, a voice, maybe real, maybe a dream. That was the Wild West too. It didn't just challenge your body, it tested your mind. You had to decide, night after night, was that sound danger, or just your nerves? And here's a strange fact for your pocket. Many folks went a little funny out there. Isolation was brutal. It wasn't just being alone. It was being alone with your thoughts. Days without hearing another human voice. Nights without a fire. Just you, the wind, and whatever was watching from the tree line. Some people talked to their horses. Others made up stories to stay sane. And a few, well, they just wandered off one night, barefoot and humming lullabies to the moon. Surviving the Wild West wasn't just about bullets and beans. It was about staying whole, mentally, emotionally, holding on to your sense of self in a place that tried every day to erase it. And so the campfire wasn't just about warmth or cooking. It was a beacon, a lifeline, a place where you could sit beside another human and remember who you were. Let's pause here and imagine it. You're sitting near the fire. The flames crackle. Someone's frying up what might be squirrel, or might not be. A harmonica plays in the background, its tune slow and sweet. You're sore, sunburned, maybe scared, but you're not alone. You've made it through another day. And maybe, just maybe, you'll make it through another tomorrow. But don't close your eyes just yet, because tomorrow there'll be more rattlesnakes, more long rides, more dust in places dust shouldn't go. Still, for now, there's firelight, there's laughter, there's life. Sparkles comment below. Would you survive your first Wild West night? Or would you befriend a coyote and start a band? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that tiny bell so you never miss a campfire story. Picture this. It's a sizzling afternoon in a dusty western town, the kind of heat that makes the wood in the boardwalk creak like it's sighing under the sun. You push through a pair of batwing doors, greeted by the jangling chords of a slightly out-of-tune piano and the low murmur of voices speaking in tones of suspicion, flirtation, and hungover resignation. Welcome to the Saloon, the social heart of the Wild West, a place where fortunes were lost, legends began, and your drink might double as industrial solvent. Let's learn how to drink like a cowboy, without dying like one. The water problem. Why booze was the safer bet. You'd think the first drink you'd want on a hot frontier day is water. Think again. Most water sources out west were shared by animals, stagnant, or downstream of something you really didn't want to think about. Wells were often shallow, contaminated, or dry by noon. So settlers, cowboys, and miners turned to alcohol, not just for celebration, but for hydration. The irony! They didn't know much about germ theory, but they did know that water made you sick, and booze didn't. Of course, when your best option is whiskey distilled in a bathtub by a guy named One-Eyed Jack, it's a mixed blessing. Whiskey, or something like it. The most popular drink was called rot-gut whiskey. Why rot-gut? Because it could literally rot your guts. This wasn't aged in oak barrels and served in fancy glasses. Nope. This was moonshine made from turpentine, tobacco juice, and burnt sugar. Sometimes kerosene got involved. On purpose. It was strong. It was cheap. And it could strip paint off a barn door. In some towns, it came with nicknames like Coffin Varnish, Tanglefoot, or 40 Rod, because after one shot, you could stagger 40 rods before falling. Still, people drank it, because the alternative was cholera. Fancy a cactus cocktail? If whiskey wasn't your thing, you might have tried a local concoction like mezcal or tequila, made from agave, or something called snakehead brew, a fermented mix of grain alcohol and whatever wild herbs someone swore would cure your rheumatism. Spoiler: it did not. In desert towns, especially near Mexico, bartenders offered pulque, an ancient drink made from fermented agave sap. It looked like spoiled milk and had the consistency of oatmeal soup, but it packed a punch and was sometimes safer than creek water. Would you try it? Comment below. Pulque or rotgut? What's your pick? Women at the bar, saloon girls, and social lines. Contrary to myth, not all saloon girls were ladies of the evening. Many were singers, dancers, or working-class women trying to make a living. They played piano, served drinks, and, if you were lucky, taught you how to hold your liquor. Women drinking at the bar wasn't always welcomed. But frontier society was flexible in some strange ways. A woman with a revolver could earn more respect than a gentleman preacher. Just don't spill her drink. Saloon culture. More than just a place to get drunk. Yes, alcohol was everywhere, but so were politics, business deals, and card games that could get you rich or dead. You could find doctors doing surgery in the back room, miners weighing gold dust, runaway poets reciting lines for a pint of beer. The piano player might double as a preacher, and the barkeep probably knew more about town politics than the mayor. Saloon doors swung open to all types: gamblers, gunfighters, prospectors, and the occasional livestock that wandered in. Bar fights and broken bottles. There's a reason Hollywood loves a bar fight. Fights were frequent and dramatic. Cowboys didn't always punch each other politely. They smashed chairs, rolled across tables, and threw each other through windows. But gunfights? Surprisingly rare. Most folks knew shooting someone meant getting hunted down by the sheriff or his posse. Still, a good punch-up could get you banned, jailed, or promoted to local legend. If you were smart, you learned to duck early, drink fast, and never play cards with a man named Two-Finger Bill. The saloon as newsroom and therapist's couch. Before Instagram or barbershop gossip, there was the saloon rumor mill. You found out who struck gold, who cheated who ran off with the blacksmith's wife. If you needed emotional support, you bought a stranger a beer and poured your heart out between sips. Therapy wasn't a thing, but drunken cowboy philosophy? That was free. and often surprisingly wise. Shoot straight, drink slow, and never saddle a borrowed horse. Mocktails and abstinence. The temperance push. Not everyone wanted a drink. By the late 1800s, temperance movements began pushing back, preaching the evils of alcohol. Demon rum, they called it. Temperance halls were opened near saloons to offer sober alternatives. Lemonade, tea, and cider tried their best to compete, but they lacked one key ingredient: buzz. Still, many families avoided saloons altogether. For some, church replaced the bar. For others, moonshine remained a private pastime, hidden in teacups and medicine bottles. Saloon games, more than just poker. Drinking wasn't the only pastime. In between shots, people played Pharaoh, the most popular card game of the time, dice games, dominoes, shooting contests, and then there were storytelling duels, where you tried to outbrag your buddy with wild tales of survival. The prize? Usually a free drink or someone else's hat. Winning required wit, charm, and an ability to lie with flair. Final round, knowing when to leave. True saloon wisdom? Knowing when to go home. Those who didn't often woke up. In jail. On the wrong side of the tracks. Or missing their boots. A good cowboy or cowgirl learned to pace their drinks, make friends fast, and never challenge the bartender's mustache. Because in the Wild West, survival wasn't just about having a fast draw. It was about having a good liver and better judgment. Speech Balloon, tell us in the comments. Would you have braved a shot of rotgut whiskey, or stuck to water and hoped for the best? Thumbs up like this video if you've ever had a drink that made you question your life choices. Bellhop bell, subscribe for more wild, weird, and wonderful stories from the past. Imagine this. You're half asleep in a tent made from rotting canvas. There's a crust of hardtack in your hand, and the guy next to you hasn't bathed since last harvest season. Suddenly, someone screams from the riverbed. Gold! That one word didn't just echo through the hills of California. It exploded across the world like wildfire wrapped in dollar signs. Welcome to the gold rush. A time when men traded civilization for shovels, dreams for delusion, and good sense for a pan and a prayer. So, would you survive it? Let's gently swirl this pan of history and see what surfaces, shall we? Strike it rich, or strike out. It all began in 1848, when James Marshall spotted gold at Sutter's Mill in California. And just like that, the greatest get-rich-quick scheme in American history was born. But let's be real. Most folks didn't get rich. They got sunburned, sick, scammed, or simply stuck. You'd arrive at the river thinking you'd be the next tycoon, only to find thousands of others already panning the same exhausted creek. Finding gold was like trying to find a raisin in a field full of chocolate chips. Deceptively hopeful, but mostly disappointing. Oh, and there was no Wi-Fi. No Trader Joe's. No sunscreen. Just a lot of dirt, a lot of noise, and a lot of men with terrible dental hygiene. What you'd need to survive. Let's build your gold prospector starter pack, shall we? A pickaxe, not just for mining, also doubles as a walking stick, intimidation tool, or makeshift pillow. A gold pan, your holy grail. You'll spend 90% of your day shaking mud around and hoping it glitters. Boots made for misery, because wet feet are part of the experience. Always. A tent. more like a suggestion of shelter. Expect wind, rain, and the occasional bear sniffing around. Thick skin, emotionally and literally. Sun, greed, and competition will wear you down. Also, get used to someone accusing you of claim jumping at least twice a week. The towns that sprang up overnight. Mining camps turned into tent cities. Tent cities turned into boom towns. And those boom towns, often one saloon, one jail, and 50 variations of bad luck. They were called places like Hangtown or Whiskey Flats, which really tells you all you need to know about the average day there. In one corner, you'd have a preacher trying to civilize things. In the next, a man with 3 teeth running a poker game and selling mysterious elixirs from a cart. Everyone was armed. Everyone was dirty. And everyone thought their fortune was just one shovelful away. Spoiler: it usually wasn't. Gold fever, it's not a joke. This wasn't just an economic movement. It was a psychological condition. People caught gold fever, a kind of social madness where logic went out the window. Men abandoned families, quit stable jobs, even sold farms just for the slim chance of finding fortune. Imagine being so desperate for shiny rocks that you willingly drink river water, sleep on gravel, and share a latrine with raccoons. People risked everything for the dream. And for every success story like Levi Strauss, who made more money selling jeans than digging gold, there were hundreds who left with nothing but debts, diseases, and a weird cough that never quite went away. The real gold was in the grift. Surprisingly, the people who really thrived during the gold rush weren't miners at all. They were merchants who sold pans, pickaxes, and overpriced beans. Hoteliers who charged the price of a horse just for a straw mattress. Schemers who sold fake maps to secret gold veins. Ever hear the saying, during a gold rush, sell shovels? This is where it comes from, because gold mining was chaos. But chaos, that's a salesman's paradise. If you had hustle, charm, and the ability to boil coffee over a campfire without setting yourself ablaze, you had a better chance than the guy elbow-deep in muddy water. It wasn't just men out there. Don't let old paintings fool you. Women were there too. And many of them weren't mining. They were running businesses, boarding houses, and occasionally entire towns. Some were cooks, some were entertainers, and some were far savvier than the men they served. A few became legends in their own right, like Eleanor Madame Mustache Dumont, a French card dealer who made a small fortune before disappearing into folklore. And while society called them camp followers, many of these women built the very foundations of California's first communities, often with more grit and strategy than the men wielding pickaxes. Gold had a darker cost. Now, here's the soft, quiet truth we don't always talk about in the golden glow of nostalgia. The gold rush brought devastation to Native American communities as settlers flooded their lands, disrupted ecosystems, and introduced diseases. Chinese immigrants were welcomed for their labor and then swiftly subjected to racism, violence, and discriminatory laws. The land was stripped bare in some places, forests cut down, rivers polluted, just to chase a sparkle in the dirt. So while some dreamed of a new life, others saw theirs erased. The Wild West wasn't all sunsets and saloons. Sometimes it was greed wrapped in a dream, carried on the backs of people who never got to share in its riches. Would you have made it? Here's your moment of self-reflection. Would you have survived the gold rush? Would you have been clever enough to sell shovels instead of swinging one? Would you have joined the stampede? Or stayed home and built a slow, quiet life? Or maybe, just maybe, you'd have found a quiet spot by the river, let the pan swirl in silence, and remembered what mattered most wasn't gold, but peace. Rhetorical question alert. What would you trade for a sliver of gold in a lawless land? The wind had a way of sounding different at dusk on the frontier, less like a breeze and more like a whisper. The kind of whisper that made you pause your coffee sip, lean a little closer to the horizon, and wonder if someone, something, was watching you from behind a sagebrush shadow. Because in the Wild West, dusk didn't just mean the sun going down. It meant stories. And stories, well, they had a way of coming alive. By the time the last rays of gold slipped behind the mesas, campfires flickered to life across the plains. Cowboys would settle into the warmth with beans, bacon, and the occasional swig of something dangerously flammable, and out would come the tales. No one wanted to admit they believed in superstitions, but no one dared ignore them either. Some swore they saw the ghost of a miner wandering with a lantern that never ran out of oil. Others believed the cry of a coyote at midnight meant death was coming for someone in the group. You didn't dare count stars on a cattle drive. Counting meant someone wouldn't make it home. And if you saw a white owl before sunrise, better sleep with one eye open, partner. Even the toughest lawmen would get a little jumpy if they heard hoofbeats without a rider. Because they'd whisper, "That's the ghost horse of Red Gulch, still lookin' for the outlaw who done him wrong." But superstition wasn't just spooky campfire seasoning. It was survival dressed in myth. If you smelled sweet flowers in the desert where none should grow, you turned around. That was a warning. Maybe from rotting cacti, maybe from spirits, but either way, it was a message. Don't go that way. Dreams were interpreted like telegrams from the beyond. A dream of teeth falling out meant someone back home was sick. A dream of drowning could be a sign that your wagon would cross a flooded stream. And no cowboy worth his spurs would ever ride out without touching his hat brim and muttering something under his breath, just in case. There were other farewells in the West too. Not just ghost stories or superstitions, but real, heart-cracking goodbyes. Because most people didn't get to stay forever in the same dusty town. One day, a prospector would get a letter postmarked from back east. His mother was ill. Or a schoolteacher would fall for a cattle rancher and leave her one-room classroom behind. Or a gunfighter would disappear after a final duel, leaving only a few words etched on a saloon table. Too many ghosts here. Sometimes they left without saying a word. Sometimes they left behind journals full of scribbled regrets and unsent letters. And sometimes the land itself took them. A flash flood, a fever, a snake you didn't see in the brush. But there's something oddly gentle in the rhythm of the West's goodbyes. The way a cowboy might ride to the edge of town at sunset, turn back once, tip his hat, and then vanish into the orange glow. No big speeches. Just that quiet, stoic respect that said, "I was here. I saw it. I survived it." Maybe that's the most Western thing of all. Learning to say goodbye with grace. To the land. To people. Even to parts of yourself. And just before the last chapter of the day closes, as the fire crackles low and the stars blink above like cold embers, you might hear the harmonica again. Soft. Lonely. Telling a tale without words. Maybe it's from the old man at the edge of the camp. Maybe it's from someone who isn't there anymore. But it always plays the same tune, the one that sounds like, "You made it through another day, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough." So what does all of this really mean? This dust-covered, wind-worn ride through the Wild West? It means survival isn't always about being the fastest draw or the hardest punch. Sometimes it's about slowing down, listening, noticing how the sun shifts on the hills, smiling at someone without needing a reason, boiling coffee even when the beans are bitter and your hands are cracked. It means the smallest things, a patched blanket, a worn harmonica, a half-told story around the fire, can be the biggest comforts. And maybe most of all, it means that even in a world as wild and unrelenting as the West, people still found ways to be kind, to laugh, to help a stranger across a river, to tell a joke with only 3 teeth and a bottle of rot-gut whiskey. That's survival. And maybe it's the kind we still need today. So tonight, as you lie back and close your eyes, imagine that old frontier still humming under the stars. Somewhere out there, a lantern flickers, a saddle creaks, a coyote sings its lullaby, and the wild doesn't seem quite so dangerous anymore. If you enjoyed this soft, dusty ride through time, saddle up and subscribe for more calming tales from the forgotten past. Hit like if you'd survive with beans and bullet holes, and comment below. What part of the Wild West would you be most curious to visit?